I was sitting in my old armchair, the same one that's been here for, probably 40 years. Looking at it, it lay on my lap, so delicate, so alive, even though it was yellowed with age. It was a certificate. A simple paper certificate my daughter Lily got for winning the school math competition. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Though so many years have passed, I can't even count them. Its edges were a little singed, barely noticeable, like someone had carelessly held it too close to a flame. That was me, of course. Back then, when life was buzzing, and it seemed like there was no time for such small things, I just shoved it into an old box and hid it in the garage. At the time, I thought it wasn't important, that there were much more crucial matters than some piece of paper. But it wasn't just a piece of paper, was it? It was a piece of her childhood, a piece of her triumph that I had ignored back then. My fingers unconsciously glided over the rough surface of the paper, feeling every bend, every imperfection. I was never a sentimental man, never one to hold on to trinkets meant to remind me of the past. But this certificate, it was always an exception. It was the anchor that kept me grounded, reminding me of what I could have done and what I didn't. And now, in my mid-60s, with years weighing heavily on my shoulders and my hair turned gray, I still come back to it. To this yellowed certificate that seems to scream about silence, about unspoken words. Next to the certificate, in the same old, dusty box I'd pulled from the depths of the garage, lay other treasures. A diploma, her first, still very childish drawing, where the sun looked like a big yellow ball and the house like a crooked shack. Photographs of her when she was just a little girl, with two funny pigtails sticking out in different directions, and that special, slightly shy smile of hers. Each item was a separate memory, a separate story that I relived over and over, sifting through these relics. And every time I touched them, the same thought, the same feeling that squeezed my heart, overwhelmed me. I remember Lily running home that day she got the certificate. Her eyes were shining, and in her hands, she held that paper like the most precious treasure in the world. She waited for my reaction, my approval, my pride, and I just nodded. Maybe I said something like, "Good job, honey," and that was it. No hug, no sincere word, no "I'm so proud of you, Lily." That was my silence, my way of expressing, or rather, not expressing feelings. I thought she'd understand. I thought my presence, my stability, that was enough proof of my love. But was it really? Now, looking at this certificate, at these photographs, at this childish drawing, I realize no words matter. They have power. They can warm, inspire, support, and silence. Silence can leave an emptiness that's very hard to fill later. And so I sit here, in my old armchair, with a yellowed certificate on my lap, and I feel that emptiness. I never told her then how proud I was. That was my biggest oversight. I kept it inside, thinking it wasn't necessary, or that she already knew. And now, I don't know if I'll ever say it. This thought, like an old, bothersome bumblebee, constantly buzzed in my head, giving me no peace. It was a part of my life, just like our small house on the edge of town, where we lived simply, as they used to say. That house that had seen so much. Children's laughter, quiet evenings, and countless conversations that never happened. It was modest but sturdy, with a small yard where my wife grew her roses, and I tried to fix things, though more often I just sat on the old bench, watching the clouds. Our life was unhurried, measured, without great ups or downs. Every day was like the last, and in that, there was a special stability that I valued above all else. I worked at the local factory, where I spent most of my life. It was hard, monotonous work, but it put food on the table and gave us a sense of security for tomorrow. From morning till night, I stood at the machine, listening to the roar of the machinery and smelling the metal. This was my life, and I knew no other. My wife, Anne, worked at the school, teaching English. She was a natural teacher, always calm, patient, able to connect with any child. She'd bring home stories about her students, about their successes and failures, and I'd listen, nodding my head, sometimes interjecting a brief remark. Our roles were clearly defined, and we both felt comfortable in that arrangement. But Lily was different. She was a quiet, observant child who often sat in a corner with a book. She could read for hours, immersing herself in worlds created by others, and it seemed she lived there, not here in our small house. She wasn't loud or overly emotional like other kids. She listened more than she spoke, observed more than she acted. Her eyes, large and intelligent, were always full of some inner light that I didn't always understand. I watched her grow, watched her change, but I never tried to enter her world. It seemed to me that it was her personal space, and I had no right to intrude. Our evenings were typical for that time. After dinner, we'd sit in front of the TV, watching the news or some show. Then, silence would fall, a silence filled with invisible words, unspoken thoughts. Lily would go to her room, and from there, only the soft rustle of pages could be heard. Anne might talk about her day, and I'd usually read the newspaper. This was our routine, our way of life. And though there were no strong emotions or loud conversations, there was always stability. A feeling that tomorrow would be like today, that everything was in its place and nothing would change. I believed in this stability, considered it the highest value. I thought that was all that was needed for a happy life. And, perhaps in some ways, I was right. But only in some ways. This stability was my anchor, the foundation upon which my understanding of family was built. I believed my role was to provide for it, to create conditions where my family would be comfortable and safe. And I did that, as best I could. I worked, brought home money, fixed what broke. I was the one who held the walls of this house, who ensured its strength. And it seemed to me that was enough. That my daughter, my Lily, would be content with that. That she would understand that my love was in my actions, in my work, in my presence. I wasn't the kind of father who talked a lot, who hugged or kissed. I was the one who quietly did his job, who provided the backbone. And I thought that was understood. Silence was my language. I grew up in a family where emotions weren't openly expressed, where men were reserved, where feelings were kept to oneself. And I adopted that. It became a part of me, my second nature. I didn't know any other way. I didn't know how to talk about what I felt, and so I was silent. Silent when Lily brought home her drawings. Silent when she talked about her successes at school. Silent when she needed my words. And this silence, which was normal for me, was probably something entirely different for her. It was a wall that I built between us, a wall that grew taller and taller with each passing year. I watched her grow, watched her transform from a little girl into a young woman. I saw her interests change, her views on the world. And I was always there, but as if at a distance. I observed, but I didn't participate. It was a strange feeling, to be present and yet absent, to be a father, but not to be the one who shares his thoughts, his feelings. And I still don't know why I acted that way. Whether it was fear or inability or just habit, but it became my essence, my way of interacting with the world, and most importantly, with my own daughter. And this habit, this silent stability that I valued so much, gradually began to turn into something else, into something that, in time, became the source of my greatest regret. She grew, and I remained silent. This silence became the backdrop of our lives, an invisible but palpable presence. At school, Lily was always an A student. She never bragged about her grades, never flaunted her achievements. She'd just bring home her report card, filled with straight A's, and lay it on the table. My wife always rejoiced, praised her, but I like to say, that's how it should be. That's normal. I believe that was the best way to raise her. Not to spoil her with praise, not to create illusions. I thought it would teach her to be humble, to value her achievements without making a fuss. It seemed right to me that it built character, but perhaps it was just my excuse for my own inability to express emotions. I saw her eyes waiting for something more than just a nod or a brief good. They searched my eyes for a spark of pride, a warm word that would confirm her efforts weren't in vain. But I just nodded. Good, I'd say, sometimes adding, keep up the good work. That was my maximum. My silent praise, which, it seemed to me, was sufficient. I didn't understand then that for a child, especially for one as sensitive as Lily, words hold immense meaning. They are the foundation upon which self-esteem and self-confidence are built. And I, with my silence, perhaps unknowingly, was eroding that foundation. Lily had many talents. She drew. Her drawings were amazing, full of colors, life, some unusual details that I, a pragmatic man, would never have noticed. She'd bring me her work, show it to me, and I'd take it in my hands, examine it. Sometimes I even saw something special in them, something that filled me with admiration. But I remained silent. I just read it, as if it were a newspaper, not a creation of her soul. She also wrote poetry. She wrote it in an old notebook she hid under her pillow. Sometimes she'd let me read them. I'd read, and in those poems I saw her world. A world full of dreams, fantasies, deep feelings that she so skillfully conveyed with words. I saw how she poured her soul into them, how she tried to express what she couldn't say aloud. And again I was silent. My silence was an answer that probably hurt her more than any criticism. Her eyes waited for confirmation. They were full of hope that this time I would say something different, something more than just good, that I would acknowledge her talent, her effort, her uniqueness, but I just nodded. Good. This nod became a symbol of our communication, a symbol of my silent love, which I thought was understood without words. I believed that my actions, my work, my care for the family spoke for themselves, that Lily understood that I loved her, that I supported her. I just couldn't express it. But did she understand? Did she feel what I was so diligently hiding? I often recall those moments when she sat beside me, waiting for my reaction. Her small hands held a drawing, her eyes fixed on my face, searching for some sign. And I, so grown up, so wise, couldn't give her what she so desperately needed. I couldn't just say, "Lily, this is wonderful, I'm proud of you." It was harder for me than any work at the factory, harder than solving any problem. It was something that went beyond my understanding, my experience. I didn't know how to do it, and so I simply avoided it. Perhaps I was afraid that if I started expressing my feelings, I would lose control of myself. Afraid that it would make me weak, vulnerable. Afraid that it would change our usual way of life, which I had so carefully built. And so I kept everything inside, locking my emotions away. But that key, as it turned out, wasn't just for my feelings, but for hers too. It locked the door between us, making our communication superficial, shallow. And this silence, which I considered my strength, was actually my weakness. I watched her grow, and with each year her eyes became a little sadder, a little more distant. She still brought me her work, but without that sparkle in her eyes, without that hope that was there before. She seemed to have resigned herself to my silence, accepted it as a given. And that was the most frightening thing, because I wanted her to be happy, to feel my love, even if I couldn't express it in words. But my silence spoke louder than any words. It spoke of distance, of misunderstanding, of the fact that I couldn't be the father she perhaps needed. And that realization, though it came too late, began to gnaw at me from within, like rust slowly but relentlessly eating away at metal. She grew, and with her grew that invisible wall between us that I had built myself. It seemed to me that it was just the natural course of things, that children grow up and drift away. But now I realized that wasn't the case. It was a consequence of my silence, my inability to express what I felt. And this moment of growth, when she first stepped beyond our small world, became a bitter lesson for me. I remember her first contest. It was some county-wide literature competition or something similar. My wife was very excited, preparing Lily, helping her with her texts. And I went fishing. That was my favorite pastime, my way of escaping reality from everything that demanded my emotional presence. I thought it wasn't important, that it was just a kids' contest, and my presence there wouldn't change anything. I sat on the riverbank, watched my bobber, and it seemed to me that everything was right, that I was doing what I was supposed to do. But deep down, something still ached, some vague feeling of guilt. When I came home, my wife met me with a face that showed both joy and disappointment. "She won," she said, and her eyes sparkled. "She was waiting for you, really waiting." I replied, "What would I do there? It's just a contest." My words sounded harsh, even to myself. I saw the spark in her eyes fade, her shoulders slump, and I knew I had caused pain, not just to my wife, but to Lily, who was probably sitting in her room, waiting for my return, waiting, perhaps, for at least some word, some sign. But I couldn't. I couldn't overcome myself, my habit of silence, my fear of expressing emotions. Later, Lily went off to college. It was a big achievement, as she got a scholarship to a state university, without any help, just through her knowledge and hard work. My wife was ecstatic, telling all our acquaintances about our daughter's success. And I said, "Well, we'll see what comes of it." That was my typical reaction to any significant achievement. I always tried to downplay its importance, as if afraid that if I acknowledged its significance, it would create some inconvenience, some expectations. I didn't want her to think I expected too much from her, or that her successes were something extraordinary. I wanted her to be grounded, to understand that life isn't just about victories, but also about daily effort. But, again, that was just my excuse. I remember her packing her things, getting ready to move to another city. She was so grown up, so independent, and I felt something inside me tighten. It was a feeling of loss, a feeling that she was drifting away, that she was flying out of our nest, and I couldn't do anything about it. I wanted to tell her something important, something that would stay with her forever. I wanted to hug her tight and tell her how much I loved her, how proud I was of her. But the words got stuck in my throat. They just wouldn't come out. I stood there, watching her pack her books, her drawings, her poems, and I was silent. Silent, as always. My wife, I suppose, felt my inner struggle. She came up to me, put a hand on my shoulder, and quietly said, "Tell her something, dear, she's waiting." But I just shrugged. What would I tell her? She knows I love her. That was my answer, my excuse. An excuse that later became my greatest regret. I saw Lily look at me, her eyes full of some unspoken sadness. She probably understood that I wouldn't say anything, that my silence was my answer, and she just nodded, as if accepting it. That day she left was one of the hardest for me. The house became empty, quiet. Her room, which had always been filled with her presence, was now just a collection of furniture. I felt that emptiness fill me from within, gnawing at my heart. And I realized that it wasn't just my daughter leaving. It was a consequence of my silence, my inability to build a real deep relationship with her. I had lost a chance. A chance to be, for her, not just a father, but a friend, a mentor, someone who would always support her and say the right words. And that realization, though late, began to weigh on me like a heavy stone. She left, and I was left with my silence and my unspoken feelings. It was a new feeling that gradually filled our home, making it even quieter than before. Lily had moved to another city to go to college, and for her, it was the beginning of a new life. For us, it was the beginning of a new era, an era of calls, letters, and constant waiting. She called every week, always on the weekend at the same time. Her voice was full of enthusiasm. She talked about new friends, about lectures, about how much she liked her new life. I answered briefly. "How are things?" I'd ask. "Got enough money?" These were my standard questions, which, I thought, were sufficient. I wanted to know she was safe, that she had everything she needed. But I didn't ask about her feelings, about her dreams, about what truly worried her. I didn't know how to do that. Maybe I was afraid to hear something that would require an emotional response from me, something that would go beyond my comfort zone. And so I stuck to my usual phrases, to my silent restraint. My wife, Anne, always picked up the phone first. She'd talk to Lily for a long time, laughing, sharing news. Then she'd hand the phone to me, and I'd feel her gaze, full of hope, fixed on my face. She'd ask me to be softer. "She's your daughter, dear. She needs your support." But I'd just shrug. "I support her. I'm asking if she's doing well." It seemed to me that I was doing everything right, that my care was expressed in practical questions, not in some mushy stuff. I was a man of action, not words, and I believed that was understood. But with each call, I felt that the distance between us wasn't shrinking. On the contrary, it was growing. Her voice became a little more distant, her stories less detailed. She seemed to have resigned herself to my silence, accepted it as a given, and that was painful. Painful to realize that I was pushing her away, creating this chasm between us. But I didn't know how to change it. I was trapped in my own cage, in my own silence, from which I couldn't find a way out. I remember one call when she was talking about a college project she was doing with great enthusiasm. She spoke about it with such passion, such inspiration, that for a moment I even felt something stir inside me. I wanted to tell her that it was wonderful, that I was proud of her dedication. But instead I said, well, the main thing is that it's useful for your future job. A slight disappointment sounded in her voice. Yes, Dad, she replied, and the conversation quickly wound down. It was another lost moment, another opportunity I missed. Over time, I started noticing that the calls were getting shorter. She still called every week, but the conversations were more formal, less personal. She talked about her studies, about the weather, about little things. And I continued to ask about money, about her health, about whether she was eating well. It was as if we were talking through thick glass, not truly hearing each other. And I felt her voice, which used to be so close, becoming more and more distant, more and more unfamiliar. My wife, seeing this, tried to stir me. You see, she's drifting away, she'd say. You have to do something. But I'd just shrug. What can I do? I don't know how. It was true. I really didn't know. My life was built on silence, on restraint, on avoiding emotional conversations. And now, when it became a problem, I found myself helpless. I was like an old car that was used to driving straight and didn't know how to turn. Sometimes at night, I lay awake, thinking about Lily, thinking about what she was like when she was little, how she ran around the house, how she laughed. And I felt a wave of regret wash over me. Regret for all the words I hadn't said, for all the hugs I hadn't given, for all the moments I'd missed. I realized that time was passing and I couldn't turn it back, but I still hoped that someday, somehow, I could fix everything, that I could find the words I had kept inside for so long. But for now, I continued to be silent, and that silence, like a shadow, followed me wherever I went. It seemed that every success of hers, every new step in her life, only deepened the chasm I had created myself. I couldn't understand why this was happening, why my silent support wasn't taken for granted. But Lily's life moved forward, and she reached new heights to which I, it seemed, had no connection. One day, Lily won a scholarship. It was some prestigious international program that gave her the opportunity to intern in Europe. My wife was thrilled. She told all our acquaintances about it, repeating every detail as if it were the most important day of her life. And I accidentally saw her interview on the news. It was late in the evening. I was flipping through channels, and suddenly I saw her face on the screen. She was talking about her plans, her dreams, about how grateful she was for this opportunity. She was so confident, so grown-up, so different. I sat and watched her, and something tightened in my chest. It was a strange feeling, a mixture of pride, surprise, and some unspeakable pain. Pride that this was my daughter, that she had achieved such success. Surprise at how much she had changed, how much she had grown. And pain that I wasn't a part of it. I didn't tell anyone I'd seen the interview. I just turned off the TV and went to bed. My wife, of course, was proud. She constantly talked about Lily, about her successes, about how smart and talented she was. And I was silent. My silence was my shield, my way of dealing with emotions I couldn't express. Something ached inside. It was a feeling I couldn't name, but it was a constant presence in my life. It was like an invisible blade, slowly but relentlessly cutting me from within. I knew it was wrong, that I should have rejoiced with my wife, that I should have expressed my pride, but I couldn't. I remember my wife once asked me, "Aren't you happy for Lily? She's achieved such success." I replied, "Of course I'm happy." I just don't see the point in shouting it to the world." My words sounded cold, even to myself, and I saw her face turn sad again. She had probably already resigned herself to my silence, but she still hoped that someday I would change. But I didn't change. I was like an old tree, rooted in the ground, unable to move. Lily's achievements, her successes in the big world, only highlighted my own insignificance, my own limitations. I was a simple factory worker, a man who never aspired to anything more. And she was different. She was bright, talented, ambitious. And I felt that difference between us grow as she drifted further and further away from me. And that was painful. Painful to realize that I was losing her, that I couldn't be a part of her new life. I often thought about what she felt when I was silent. Did she understand that it wasn't indifference, but simply an inability to express my feelings? Did she think I didn't love her, that I wasn't proud of her? These thoughts gnawed at me from within, giving me no peace. I wished I could turn back time, say those words I never uttered. But the past can't be undone, and I was left with my pain, my regret, my silence. My life continued at its usual pace. The factory, home, quiet evenings. But now, in that silence, a new note appeared. A note of sadness, a note of regret. I watched my wife take pride in Lily, how she told her friends about her, how she reminisced about her childhood, and I felt envy wash over me. Envy of her ability to express her feelings, of her ability to grieve, of her ability to be open. I wished I could be like that, but I couldn't. I was trapped in my own cage, which I had built myself. And that cage, though comfortable, now seemed like a prison. I continued to be silent, even when everything inside me screamed about love, about pride, about the desire to hug her and tell her how dear she was to me. But the words just wouldn't come out. They were stuck somewhere deep inside, finding no exit. And this silence, which once was my support, now became my curse. It separated me from those I loved and left me alone with my unspoken feelings. She came for Christmas, brought him an expensive watch, and he replied, "Why did you spend money?" And her smile changed, and his silence became even more palpable. After that visit, after that conversation that never truly happened, Lily called less often. At first it was every 2 weeks, then once a month. Her voice on the phone became more distant, her stories more formal. She talked about her job, about new cities she visited, but she never spoke about her feelings, about her experiences. And I realized it was my fault. I had created this distance myself, pushed her away myself. I heard my wife crying at night. Her quiet sobs came from the next room, and they were worse than any reproach. I knew she was crying for Lily, for our relationship, which was crumbling before our eyes. I wanted to go to her, hug her, tell her everything would be all right. But I couldn't. The words again got stuck in my throat, and my hands remained still. I was like paralyzed, locked in my own world of silence. It felt as if something was tightening inside him. It was a feeling as if an invisible ring was squeezing my chest, making it hard to breathe. It was a pain I couldn't express, a pain I carried within me like a heavy burden. I realized I was losing my daughter, that she was drifting further and further away from me, and I couldn't do anything about it. I was helpless. My life, which once seemed so stable and clear, had now turned into a tangled mess of unspoken emotions and regret. I remember my wife once directly asked me, "Why don't you talk to her? Why don't you tell her you love her, that you're proud of her?" I replied, "I don't know how." I never did. It was true. I never knew how to talk about my feelings. I grew up in a family where emotions were taboo, where men were reserved and silent, and I adopted that. It became a part of me, my second nature. And now, when it became a problem, I found myself helpless. I was like an old car that was used to driving straight and didn't know how to turn. I watched Lily build her life overseas. She sent us photos of herself happy, smiling. She traveled, met new people, succeeded in her career, and I was happy for her, genuinely happy. But that happiness was mixed with bitterness. Bitterness that I wasn't a part of it, that I couldn't share those moments with her. I was just an observer, watching her life from afar. My silence became my curse. It separated me from those I loved and left me alone with my unspoken feelings. I wished I could turn back time, say those words I never uttered. But the past can't be undone. And I was left with my pain, my regret, my silence. With each passing day, this tightening sensation inside me intensified. It was like invisible shackles holding me, preventing me from moving forward. I realized that I had created this situation myself, and that I had to fix it myself. But I didn't know how. I was locked in my own world, and I couldn't find a way out. I often remembered those moments when Lily was little, when she ran around the house, when she laughed. And I felt a wave of regret wash over me. Regret for all the words I hadn't said, for all the hugs I hadn't given, for all the moments I'd missed. I realized that time was passing, and I couldn't turn it back. But I still hoped that someday, somehow, I could fix everything. That I could find the words I had kept inside for so long. But for now, I continued to be silent, and that silence, like a shadow, followed me wherever I went. Time passed, and Lily lived her life far from us. She's been married for a long time, has children, and I only see my grandkids in photos. Photos she sends us by mail or email. I look at them, see their smiling faces, their happy eyes, and feel a wave of sadness wash over me. Sadness that I can't hug them, can't hear their laughter, can't be a part of their lives. I'm just a grandpa in photographs, distant and incomprehensible. In my daughter's room, everything is as it was. When she left, we decided not to change anything. Her bed, her desk, her bookshelves, everything remained in its place. My wife sometimes goes in there, dusts, rearranges things, and I rarely go into that room. It's like a museum for me, holding memories of what was and what is no more. It's clean, quiet, too quiet. This silence, which once was comfortable for me, now seems oppressive. It reminds me of my silence, of all the words I didn't say, of all the moments I missed. I remember Lily when she was little, how she ran around this room, how she played with her toys, how she read books. I remember her laughter, her voice, her energy. And now all of that has been replaced by silence. A silence that screams about my absence, about my inability to be there when she needed me most. I feel this silence filling me from within, gnawing at my heart. Sometimes I catch myself just sitting and looking at the door to her room, as if waiting for it to open any moment, and for her to appear in the doorway just as she used to be, with that special smile of hers. But it doesn't happen. She's far away, in her own world, a world I denied myself. I tried to get used to this loneliness, to this silence, but it didn't disappear. It was a constant presence in my life, reminding me of my mistakes, my oversights. I felt a wave of regret wash over me. Regret for all the words I didn't say, for all the hugs I didn't give, for all the moments I missed. I realized that time was passing, and I couldn't turn it back. But I still hoped that someday, somehow, I could fix everything, that I could find the words I had kept inside for so long. My life continued at its usual pace. The factory, home, quiet evenings. But now, in that silence, a new note appeared, a note of sadness, a note of regret. I watched my wife, Miss Lily, how she often looked at her photographs, how she reminisced about her childhood. And I felt envy wash over me, envy of her ability to express her feelings, of her ability to grieve, of her ability to be open. I wished I could be like that, but I couldn't. I was trapped in my own cage, which I had built myself. And that cage, though comfortable, now seemed like a prison. I continued to be silent, even when everything inside me screamed about love, about pride, about the desire to hug her and tell her how dear she was to me. But the words just wouldn't come out. They were stuck somewhere deep inside, finding no exit. And this silence, which once was my support, now became my curse. It separated me from those I loved and left me alone with my unspoken feelings. One day, as I sat at the bar with my old friend Joe, we were talking about life, about the old days. Joe had been my friend since school. He knew me better than anyone else. He was always straightforward, never hid his thoughts. And then he, looking at me with his piercing eyes, suddenly said, "Your girl, she's a big deal. Why don't you talk about her?" His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't expected such a question, and it caught me off guard. I felt my heart pound, a lump rise in my throat. I wanted to answer him, to justify myself, but the words got stuck. I just nodded. What's there to say? That was my standard answer, my excuse, which always saved me from emotional conversations. I thought it was enough. I thought he'd understand that I just couldn't talk about such things. But I saw his gaze become even more piercing, as if he was trying to read my thoughts. Joe didn't give up. "She's achieved so much," he said. "She's your daughter. You should be proud of her." His words were simple, but they pierced right through me. I knew he was right. I knew I should be proud of her, that I should talk about her. But I couldn't. My silence was my shield, my way of dealing with emotions I couldn't express. We sat in silence, and I felt a wave of regret wash over me. Regret for all the words I hadn't said, for all the hugs I hadn't given, for all the moments I'd missed. I realized that time was passing, and I couldn't turn it back. But I still hoped that someday, somehow, I could fix everything. That evening when I came home, I couldn't sleep. Joe's words spun in my head, giving me no peace. "Your girl, she's a big deal. Why don't you talk about her?" These words were like sharp thorns, digging into my heart. I got out of bed, went to the living room, where the old dresser stood. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old yellowed box. The same box that held the certificate, the diploma, the photographs, her first drawing, and her letters. I picked up one of her letters, the one she wrote to me when she first went to college. I reread it with a flashlight because I didn't want to turn on the light and wake my wife. In the letter, she wrote about her impressions, about new friends, about how much she liked her new life. She wrote about how much she missed us, how she waited for our calls. And at the end of the letter, she wrote, "Dad, I hope you're proud of me." Those words pierced right through me. I felt my eyes fill with tears. I couldn't hold them back. They streamed down my cheeks, leaving wet trails. I held the letter in my hands and it trembled. I realized she had been waiting for my answer, my support, my pride. And I was silent, silent as always. I reread that letter again and again, and every word was like a knife plunging into my heart. I saw how she tried to reach out to me, how she sought my attention, my approval, and I didn't give it to her. I was blind, deaf, unable to understand her needs. I sat there in the dark with the flashlight and the letter in my hands and felt a wave of regret wash over me. Regret for all the years I had spent in silence, for all the opportunities I had missed. I wished I could turn back time, say those words I never uttered, but the past can't be undone. And I was left with my pain, my regret, my silence. Those words Lily had written once, they pierced my very soul, stirring long hidden feelings. I fell asleep with that letter in my hands, and the dream was strange, vivid, like reality. In my dream, I saw her as a little girl, with pigtails sticking out in different directions, just like in that old photograph. She ran around our yard, chasing butterflies, laughing. Her laughter was so pure, so clear, that I felt my heart fill with warmth. She was so carefree, so happy, and I stood nearby, watching her, and it seemed to me that I could protect her from all the evil in this world. Then, in the dream, she came up to me. Her small hands reached for mine, and her eyes, large and intelligent, were full of some childlike wisdom. She looked at me, and her voice, so gentle and pure, sounded in my head. "Are you happy that I'm like this?" This question sounded so sincere, so direct, that I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. I wanted to hug her, to hold her close, to tell her that I was happy, that I was proud of her, that she was the best thing that had ever happened in my life. But I couldn't. My hands were still, and the words got stuck in my throat. I stood there, in the dream, and was silent, silent as always. Her face grew sad. Her eyes filled with tears, and she turned away from me. I watched her drift away, disappear into the distance, and I couldn't do anything about it. I wanted to scream, to catch up to her, but my body was paralyzed, and I felt a wave of regret wash over me, so strong that it pierced me through and through. I woke up in tears. My face was wet with tears, and my pillow was damp. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, and in my head, her childish voice still echoed. "Are you happy that I'm like this?" It wasn't just a dream. It was a reflection of my fears, my regrets, my unspoken feelings. It was the cry of my soul which had been silent for so long. I got out of bed, went to the window. Outside, it was still dark, but the first rays of the sun were already appearing in the east. I stood there, watching the sunrise, and felt a wave of determination wash over me. I realized I couldn't be silent anymore. I couldn't hide behind my fear, behind my habit. I had to tell her I was proud of her. I had to tell her I loved her. In the morning, I picked up the phone. My hands trembled slightly, but I felt a wave of determination wash over me. I wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to tell her everything I felt. But then I stopped. What would I tell her? How would I explain my silence to her? How would I express everything that had accumulated in my soul? I didn't know. I was afraid my words would sound awkward, that she wouldn't understand me. And then I decided I wouldn't call, I would write a letter in which I could express everything I felt, a letter in which I could tell her about my love, about my pride, about my regrets, a letter that would become a bridge between us, a bridge I had been trying to build for so long. I took a pen and paper and began to write. My hands no longer trembled. I felt the words flow from my soul, transforming into sentences, into paragraphs. It was difficult, but at the same time liberating. I wrote about her childhood, about her successes, about how I had watched her from afar, and how proud I was of her every step. I wrote about my mistakes, about my silence, about my regret, and I wrote about my love. A love that had always been there, but which I had never been able to express in words. I wrote until morning, and when the sun had already risen above the horizon, the letter was ready. She comes for the summer with the kids. They are silent. They hug. The hero gives her the box with everything he kept, certificates, poems, her letters. She says nothing, just cries. He finally says, "I was always proud of you. I just didn't know how to say it." This was a moment of truth, a moment that changed everything. I thought that silence was also love. I believed in it my whole life, justifying my restraint, my inability to express feelings. It seemed to me that my actions, my work, my presence, that was enough proof of my love. I thought Lily would understand that I loved her, even if I didn't say it aloud. But now I realize that was just my own justification, my own illusion. Love, true love, needs words. It needs expression, it needs confirmation. Silence can be understood between very close people who have been through many trials together, but even then, words hold immense meaning. They are the bridge that connects hearts, the light that dispels the darkness of misunderstanding. And I, with my silence, built a wall between myself and my daughter. A wall that grew taller and taller with each passing year. Now I call every week, and each time I say something important. I ask her about her life, about her feelings, about her dreams. I tell her about my day, about my thoughts, about my experiences. I tell her how much I love her, how proud I am of her, how much I value her. It's not always easy. Sometimes words still get stuck in my throat, sometimes I feel awkward. But I try. I understand that it's important, that it's necessary for our relationship to become real, deep. The moral of this story is simple, yet very profound. The words we are afraid to say might be the most important ones. We often fear expressing our feelings, fear being vulnerable, fear that we won't be understood. But it is precisely these words which we keep inside that can be the ones that change everything. They can heal wounds, they can build bridges, they can warm hearts. Love without words is like fire without warmth. It exists, it burns somewhere deep inside, but its flame isn't felt, its warmth doesn't reach those we love. It remains hidden, invisible, and therefore cannot fulfill its main function, to warm, to bring joy, to create a connection. I realized this too late, but fortunately, not too late to fix everything. And now I know that words are not just sounds. They are the bricks from which love is built.